that was when it hit me like a ton of bricks because then the doctor comes in and he says, okay, I'm gonna order you one dose of pain medication and write you a prescription for the same things I have at home and send you home. And that medication wasn't helping. So I got sent home with insufficient medication, still in pain. And a lot of people with sickle cell go through that, and it's hard because you can't fight against it when they say it's a black disease or drug seeking. I mean, that's an opinion that's being formed before I even get to the emergency room, and so that trip.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Being Rare podcast. So, February is Black History Month. It's also the month we celebrate Rare Disease Day. Today's conversation, we're talking about being rare and Black. Joining me are two patient advocates, Genesis Jones and James Griffin. Genesis is a proud sickle cell warrior, patient advocate, and survivor of both a bone marrow transplant and cancer. Genesis advocates for and raises awareness about sickle cell disease, bone marrow transplant complications, and cancer survivorship, specifically in marginalized communities. She is a two-time author. Her first book, Rebirth, A Sickle Cell Warrior's Journey, and her second book, Resilient, A Sickle Cell Warrior's Crossover. You can find both of those books, Genesis, tell me, maybe Amazon?
Amazon.
On Amazon. Also joining me for today's conversation is James Griffin, who is a patient advocate and the author of Breaking Silence, Living with Sickle Cell Anemia. His advocacy focuses on addressing biases in healthcare and raising awareness for sickle cell disease while amplifying the voices of others affected by rare diseases. James, your book, Amazon?
Yes, Amazon as well.
All right, just a quick plug. So, welcome both of you to the Being Rare podcast. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarita, for having me.
Absolutely, thank you. Um, so we started the Being Rare and Black episodes probably about 2 years ago. We wanted to really take the opportunity, the month of February, to highlight the voices of people of color in the rare disease spaces. Our first episode, we really highlighted just leadership across patient advocacy organizations. And so this year, we wanted to really highlight patient stories and look at the difference between what having a rare diagnosis might look like for a person of color. So thank y'all so much for being a part of today's conversation. Genesis, I'd like to start with you. I'd love to know your backstory. So, can you tell us how did you learn of your sickle cell diagnosis? We know that a lot of sickle cell diagnoses are discovered by way of newborn screening. Was that your experience or your parents' experience? How did you first know about your sickle cell diagnosis yourself, even?
Yeah, so my mom found out about my sickle cell before I was actually born. They told me that, she did a test before, when she was pregnant, and that, she was told that, I had sickle cell. So, coming in before I was born, they were kind of prepared that, we're gonna have a daughter with sickle cell. More so because they knew that both of them had the trait, and that they had me with the disease. So
Yeah.
that's how they kind of found out that I was born with sickle cell, and that they kind of prepared themselves for that. And you know at a young age, I had sickle cell at a very, I would say I had a lot of pain at a young age, because I had my first sickle cell crisis at 3. And then I was in the hospital mainly for sickle cell and asthma. I had my first silent stroke at the age of 8. And shortly after that, I was put on blood transfusions to help with management for the sickle cell. And at that at the age of 8, that's when they put me on the Be the Match registry to try to help, try to see if, I had a match or what was going on. But I did not know at that time that they had such a lack of diversity on the registry for Black ethnicities. So that's kind of how my journey got started, and how I've continued to kind of spread that awareness for that.
Wow. James, what about you? Did your parents learn of your diagnosis by way of newborn screening, or what was your beginning with sickle cell?
No, my parents didn't learn through newborn screening. In fact, they didn't even have newborn screening when I was born. So my parents didn't know anything about sickle cell. They didn't know that they carried a trait, the gene for making sickle cell and passing it down from parent to child. So they had already had two siblings, two kids together, and so I had older siblings, and so they grew up normal. And so when I was born, my mother was thinking it would be the same for me. But when I was born, she noticed right away that I had jaundice within my eyes, and so she alerted the doctor that I was, uh, she alerted the doctor, and then that doctor told her that everything should be fine. It should go away within a certain amount of time, and not to worry about it. But a mother's intuition is just it's just so high that she felt a sense that something was wrong, and so didn't think nothing of it. She brought me home, and I had an episode of pain when I was 2 years old. I was playing in a room with my other two siblings at the time, and I let out a loud scream, a loud cry. My mother came over, checked me out. She thought maybe I had bumped my hand on the wall because my hand was like swollen and puffy. It looked like a tennis ball, and so like she came and checked me out. Picked me up, noticed that she couldn't calm me down, and talked to my brother, sister. They didn't see anything, and nothing happened. It was just out of nowhere, hand swelling, and so that was unusual. So she decided to take me to the hospital, and that's when I was diagnosed with sickle cell after running multiple tests. No broken bones found, no fractures. They did blood tests, and that's how I was discovered that I had sickle cell disease. And after I was born, they went on to have another child, and that child was tested for sickle cell, and thankfully that no one in my family had sickle cell. I was the only one with sickle cell. So even after knowing they had another child, and it was a good thing that she didn't have sickle cell either, because a lot of parents don't know that the percentages of having sickle cell is 25% in every pregnancy, not just one pregnancy. If you get a child with sickle cell, no, it's every pregnancy. So I'm fortunate that we didn't have any other cases of sickle cell in my family, because I do see families with multiple people who have sickle cell, and that's how I was diagnosed, and that's how I found out. And so 2 years old, me with sickle cell, before I'm barely able to walk good and run, I'm in pain already. So
So let me ask you, and I want to ask you too, Genesis. So, finding out at 2 years old by way of a pain crisis, and Genesis, you got your diagnosis, or your parents learned of your diagnosis in utero, but you had your first pain crisis at 3 years old. And you may not remember yourself, but just, you know, trusting conversations from your parents. And James, let me start with you. What was that like for you in terms of experiencing a pain crisis, or your parents, have they ever shared conversations about what was that like, taking you to the doctor or to the emergency room, or whatever that care coordination was? Have y'all talked about what that journey was like for you as a child?
we didn't talk about the journey. My mother and father never brought it up to me what it was like. I know I can recollect like some memories, because I remember being so young. I'm in the crib bed, and I could look through the rails and see my mother sitting there and waiting, and remember having like stuffed animals in the crib, and I have an IV on my foot because I'm a baby, a toddler, and they can't get IVs in my arms, so I have an IV with the board to keep it in place so it doesn't get ripped out. So I remember that time very vividly, and remember like moments. I don't remember every hospitalization, but I remember times, certain points, like when I was 6 years old, being in the hospital gown and waiting to get a blood transfusion because I'm having pain. So I remember certain hospitalizations as a kid, but all I remember a lot during my childhood is just being back and forth to the hospital, and my mother coming and sitting with me from the time visiting hours are open until it's closed, and she has other children at home, and my dad had to take the role of taking care of them and watching over them while she was with me the whole time. And so it took a lot on my family, a lot of support to come from, both of my parents to support each other in that case. But that's what my experiences was growing up. It's just me in the hospital, my mother there, and just waiting to be relieved from pain. So I went through a lot of that, and those are the moments I remember most.
Yeah. What about you, Genesis? Do you remember or have you had conversations with your parents about what that journey was like? Just at 3 years old, your first pain crisis and then a major crisis at 8.
Yeah,
What was that like for you?
yeah, I remember the moments of being in and out of the hospital. I remember the conversations with my grandma afterwards of like her bringing me to the hospital, those drives back and forth, her having to take off from work, being in waiting in the waiting room, the doctors coming in and out. I do just remember the nurses coming in, for the moments of the IV and the medications. I don't remember all of it, but I do just remember being in the hospital, because those were a lot of the experiences that I do have for my childhood, unfortunately. I do remember it taking a toll on the family, and also my mental state of, because I was in elementary school and I remember that being a lot for me too, trying to keep up with the coursework and all of that. So I think that was my take of it, of like always trying to keep up with my peers, and all of that was a lot for me at that point. So I just remember the very very different parts of it, but I remember all the recollections of why and how the emotional toll and physical toll it took on me as a child. So
Yeah. Are you an only child,
I
Genesis?
am an only
You
child,
are.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, I do want to ask, and you do not have to answer this question, but I'm just curious. You talked about the emotional or the overall impact of your diagnosis. Um, none of your other siblings were diagnosed with sickle cell. Did you find yourself feeling a burden of responsibility, like mom being away was your fault? Or as a mom, I
Hmm.
have 5 kids,
Okay.
and my youngest child is the one with the rare condition. And because of hospitalizations and different things for him, we've had to just really navigate like birthday parties for the other kids and all the different things. And so I was just curious, did you ever feel that added burden of um your siblings couldn't do something or get something because you were in the hospital, or because mom had to be with you in the hospital? And again, you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No, I'll answer. No, I never felt that burden. I just knew my mother, she kept us close and she would always involve them in my process and let them know exactly what I was going through. They would come to hospital visits too and visit me. But I've never felt the burden as a child. It was just a way of life for me. So I was just in and out of the hospital. But I knew the toll it took on my family. Like I knew like my dad had to be there with my siblings, and so me being in pain would push me to try to fight longer or try not to go to the hospital. Let me tough it out. Let me try to get over this crisis so that you know I don't have to go to the hospital, and then that'll help my mother and I have to go to the hospital. One of the things you mentioned earlier was, did my mother ever tell me stories? She didn't tell me stories about my hospitalizations, but she did tell me that she had to change careers. That was one of the things that she told me, because she was a dental assistant and she had to change from that to become like a preschool teacher just so she could be home with me. So she did have to change careers. And so that's what she told me, but I didn't never see the burden. I just knew that, like just being in and out of hospital was affecting my family, involving all of us. And that's the thing with you have someone with the rare disease, it doesn't just affect one, it affects the whole family. And that's what a lot of people don't understand when they talk about rare diseases and people with patients with rare diseases. It's not till I got older that I can see like certain situations how it may have played a fact in growing up, and maybe they may have went without, but like I said, she kept all of us involved, and she was still actively involved with them when she wasn't at the hospital. So, um, I never
That's
felt
cool.
the burden growing up, and never heard
Yeah,
those conversations in the house either about, them having any type of way towards me having sickle cell
yeah.
or towards each other.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. And I think just as a parent, I'm very intentional about that same thing. Like, so high five to your mom,
Thank you.
and your dad for just
Thank you.
holding it down. I think it's just is so important, and yours too, Genesis. But it really captured me when you talked about your other siblings, and I was thinking, man, like it's four of them, and I have five, and so I try to keep touch with my kids to just make sure what we're going through with Elijah is not negatively impacting them,
Hmm.
and making them feel a kind of way. So I was just curious what that experience was like for you. I appreciate you sharing that. So let me
Absolutely.
I would love for us to kind of highlight just the stigmas and biases. We kind of plan to cover that in this call, and I have had conversations with, just a lot of friends and colleagues, um, who I've met from being in the rare disease space, and they have sickle cell. One colleague, talks about how the red carpet is rolled out for her child with sickle cell, but she believes it's because she's a child. And then on the other end of it, I've had adult friends and colleagues talk about themselves being the patient, and how if they show up to the emergency room in a pain crisis, they're treated as if they're drug seekers, or they're just looking for pain medication. And so I wanted to make sure we covered, talking about the biases and the stigma and the disparities of care that you've both talk about already. Like, this is something that's a part of your conversation when in your advocacy role. Genesis, you've talked about, like your range of challenges, sickle cell, cancer, bone marrow transplant. Um, how have your experiences as a Black patient affected the treatment and the care that you receive in terms of support, resources, overall services? Do you think being a Black patient influenced the care you received as a sickle cell patient, as a bone marrow transplant patient, and as a cancer patient?
I think no. I think it is the medical dynamic of how I've received my care based on what I even say I'm coming in for. And I can give a prime example. Um, when I was receiving care for sickle cell, there was a lot of stigma, a lot of, oh, you're just coming in for, drugs, or you're just coming in for such and such because, your counts look fine, or why aren't you just taking your pain meds at home? Or, there's so much stuff that people would say or give you a hard time about your veins or such and such. And it's just the way that they would treat you based on your disease, And I don't even think, even if I was a white person with sickle cell, I think it's not even about that. I think it's about how I was treated based on how the medical system was based on for sickle cell, as compared to what I've been going through with my transplant over the 5 years, and how I've been treated with my cancer. There's been a just complete shift that I've noticed how they prioritize cancer, and how they prioritize the way that they want to handle your care differently, because they feel like it needs to be quicker, or it needs to be handled with a little bit more what is it a little bit more intent, care, if that makes sense. Like
Like in
I
yeah,
think
like
it's
urgency,
urgency,
intentionality.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
urgency. Um, Even if I did have a background with sickle cell, they're still treating me as if I'm an oncology patient,
Mhm.
and I'm still in a way reaping that benefit, but I think it's not the way that they should be treating me, because even if because I am black, they're still treating me like I'm an oncology patient. So I've been treated differently over these last years just because I had cancer, if that makes sense. So
Wow.
I will say I don't think it's because I'm black anymore. I think it's based on the disease that you have,
Yeah, so
unfortunately.
yeah, and so and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is you don't think your race played a part in how you received care as a sickle cell patient. You think it was the sickle cell diagnosis just across the board. Because it was sickle cell, that's the diagnosis itself is what you believe created the stigma or the disparities of care. But when you got your cancer diagnosis,
Yes.
it shifted positively. And now the cancer diagnosis, it it heightened the priority for the
Yes.
level of care that you now receive.
Yes.
That is mind blowing to me.
Yes. And that's why I'm like, it's in a sense it's still about being black, it's still about all those things, but it's still about the diagnosis that they're highlighting in the end.
Yeah,
And it's making sure that we're advocating for the right things and making sure that the medical team understands all across the board you have to treat people, hematology, oncology, you have to treat them the way that overall equality, because it's not really about the diagnosis in the end. It's about making sure that the patient is being treated the way that they need to for what they're coming in for.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
James, I'm very interested. I had almost a slightly different question for you, but I want to hear your perspective on this. Like, what has been your journey in terms of, or what has been your experience as a black man, um, and how the healthcare system responds to your diagnosis? Do you feel that it has influenced how you receive care?
I do think race and being a black man affects the care that I receive because, you know, everyone has a stigma against black men in the United States anyway. So just seen as more violent, more aggressive, more to use drugs, uh, more to be non-compliant. So I think that does play a role when you come in now for sickle cell and more to I said that more to use drugs, but because you label sickle cell as a drug-seeking disease. So now, as someone who is black, it hurts me coming into the emergency room when you have the bias of sickle cell disease drug seekers. So in any situation, any point in time, I can come in looking for the medication I need. When I come in asking for morphine, Dilaudid, something that's seen as, you know, opioids, those opioid medications, now you can say, well, you're looking for these drugs. So I do believe that, it affect my care being a black man within the arena, the hospital system, I should say. I do think and do believe it affected care coming in for those medications because now um, I'm in a situation where I'm not seeing anyone who look like me, and I'm being treated by some people who only believe what being projected about a black man or someone within the healthcare system. So I believe it did affect my care. And just remembering the times when I was a pediatric patient, and like you said, the care is hands on, it's immediate, it's quick. Everybody has the compassion. When you go in, they say, oh, they feel sorry for you almost. Nurses are like, oh, I remember taking care of sickle cell patients and they just went through the worst pain. And if I could just help them get rid of that pain, well, now you transition from pediatrics care to adult care. And I remember the one time that made me frustrated and feel like I wanted to give up was going to the emergency room at the age of 20. waiting for one, we wait long amount of times just to get back to be seen, but waiting for hours, and I'm in this almost ball that's not sitting in a chair, trying not to move any because I'm in unbearable pain, and I'm trying to suppress tears because it's other people in the emergency room, and I get up to ask the nurse, can she get me back, and she said we'll get to you, and so I go back and have a seat, and then I get up again hours later, still in the same amount of pain, and I get the same thing. We'll get back to you. And so now I'm becoming frustrated. I'm becoming irritated because I can't get rid of this pain, and I'm in this pain. And so finally, I got up one more time, and I asked, and on my way going to the reception desk to speak to the nurse flagged over the security guard, and that security guard interrupted me from going to see them. He stopped in front of me and then he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm just trying to get back, trying to see a nurse. I'm in all this pain. I have sickle cell." And then he said, "I'll talk to the nurse," and then come back and tell me they're working on it. And so after waiting 5 hours or more just to be back and be seen, um, and then only to get back and have a nurse say, "Well, if you were in this much pain, why didn't you come back sooner?" That was when it hit me like a ton of bricks because then the doctor comes in and he says, "Okay, I'm gonna order you one dose of pain medication and write you a prescription for the same things I have at home and send you home." And that medication wasn't helping, so I got sent home with insufficient medication, still in pain. And a lot of people with sickle cell go through that, and it's hard because you can't fight against it when they say it's a black disease or drug seeking. I mean, that's an opinion that's being formed before I even get to the emergency room. And so that trip led me to go back and tell my mother what happened, and then I have to go back with a caregiver and end up being admitted. But it's just the weight of that, dealing with that, and that creates an emotional toll on you to begin with, outside of just having the pain. So that was one of the experiences that led me um to see, like, is it me or is it the disease? But I do believe being a black man is hard going through the emergency room when you're asking for medications and dosages.
Yeah, yeah. Man, to say that you saw her flag down the security guard, like I completely believe that that happens even today. Like I
Hmm.
feel like it. I feel like if you I think if at any moment you look like you're giving some level of pushback, it's a problem for the healthcare space. It's almost like the expectation is for you to simply be compliant. And that's not always the case. And when you're medically gaslighting me or you're being dismissive to, what I've presented for. And so wow.
It
I'm
is, and it's like instances in cases like that where it's like it's pisses me off because I'm like they give oncology patients an access card to actually just go back quicker, and I understand that it's more so to have that access of care more quicker because I understand oncology patients might have care that they're trying to get more quicker, like chemo or whatever. But I feel like that should be the same instance for sickle cell because he's in 10 out of 10 pain and you're trying to tell him to wait a little bit more longer, you know?
Mhm,
Like I feel
mhm,
like that's why I'm saying there should be a equality across the board
mhm.
when there's cases like that or just overall.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I will say
Def-
too, I don't know if um I can't recall who it is, but I have heard in the rare disease space someone was talking about their child's diagnosis and they were talking about the challenges, in terms of like healthcare and all the stuff. And they actually said, I wish my kid had cancer because they knew that things would be completely different. It's one of those diagnoses people they flock to, in terms of research, in terms of
Mhm.
awareness and education and all the stuff. And
See, people don't
um,
see color when it comes to cancer. People don't
yeah,
don't see color, so they just, like you said, it's just everyone knows that the effects of cancer, what it can do. But when you say
Hmm.
sickle cell, not that we want to um, say
Yeah,
anything bad about cancer, people living with cancer, but when you say sickle cell, now it's not the same. It doesn't have the same effect. It's
right.
always the negative things that come up because it's been said in the media. Drug seekers, frequent flyers,
Yeah,
nurses, providers don't have that same empathy towards sickle cell as they do someone going through that cancer diagnosis. And the
yeah.
awareness is just for sickle cell, it seems to be swept under the rug when we say sickle cell, and that's the key component and why I advocate. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about, advocacy. Genesis, I know you have been very vocal about your experiences and you're very passionate about the work that you do. Um, how 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 did your own personal experience push you into advocacy? Like, how did you find yourself not just advocating for yourself, but for other people experiencing the same things that you're experiencing, but then also really highlighting marginalized communities? Like, how did your journey push you to that advocacy space?
Um, I think just due to the lack of awareness, it started with I'd be the match and trying to find that my own match with the registry when I turned 8, and learning that there is such a lack of black people on the registry, and trying to share my story with NMDP, and trying to get more people to register there, and trying to get more people to join with NMDP, and getting more people there, and then just knowing that not everybody is willing to share, but I am. So knowing that there's a lot of unheard voices, but I want to people to just know that they're not alone, and wanting people to continue to know that I share because I want other people to understand and understand sickle cell, understand what I went through because of my transplant, and why I'm still here, and why I think that the lack of awareness for the type of complications that I had, and just overall the lack of things that people aren't aware of, like still having chronic pain after transplant. I share because I think a lot of people don't understand, and that's why there needs to be more education. So I think that's how I got pushed into it, and why I continue to keep voicing my opinion, and voicing my story, because if I don't share, who won't? Who will? And I think that's the most important thing. And there's like so much more that needs to be done within the sickle cell space. And I know that there's a lot more that I'm willing to share. So that's kind of how I got started.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think you raise a good point when you say, not everyone wants to share. That's one thing that I always try to champion people. If sharing your journey is not, it's not easy for people to
mhm.
do. And I totally respect people who don't want to do that. But to those of us who are willing to, I think it's so impactful, because it still shows that support to the community of people who aren't yet ready to do that. You know what I mean? Like, there's still somebody out here talking about it and raising awareness, and sometimes, you know, radicalizing the realities of what it looks like to navigate these journeys. And so I always applaud people who are willing to share, but I always fully support those who don't want to. So I just wanted to highlight that. What about you, James? Like, how does your personal journey push you into advocacy? And I know you and I met through legislative advocacy. How did your journey push you into the advocacy space?
Yeah, so I'm one of the ones who didn't feel comfortable sharing my story until I was older. I actually
Yeah.
kept sickle cell hidden and never wanted to speak about sickle cell. I was ashamed of having sickle cell growing up, and I didn't never want anybody to know what I was going through and know I was in pain and be considered seen as being weak. And so I always wanted to do everything like everybody else. So, I kept kept it hidden and didn't speak about it until I had that one encounter in the hospital when I said, I felt like I was being stigmatized for having sickle cell, and I was frustrated about that. And I was like, I know I'm not the only one going through that, so it has to be other people going through that. For the most part, I would always get great care when I would go into the emergency rooms, and be treated, with that compassion. And so having that experience opened my eyes that, you know, this is not happening just to me. This is happening on a larger scale, and so I need to speak up for those that is happening to. And so that's what kind of motivated me to want to share my message because, like I said, I was more reserved, didn't want to speak up about it, and people would say, "You should speak up about your story." I just didn't know how to go about doing it, and then eventually, I decided, yes, I need to share my story, and that's kind of how I got into it, was writing a book and doing different, showing up in hospitals and joining support groups and just speaking about my experiences in the hospital. And so that led me to, go to different arenas with sickle cell organizations and just show up and open up about my story because when I tell people I have sickle cell, they said either they heard of it, but they don't know what it is. They know someone with it. One day they'll be okay, and then one day they'll be on the couch laid up like they're about to die. And so um, I wanted to share, okay, what's happening and why are we going through this pain? And I wanted to tell people exactly what the pain felt like, how the hospitalizations was going, and raise awareness because people think, when I go to the hospital, I'm just going there and being released. I wanted to let them know I need medication to get rid of this pain. And so that kind of was my focal point, was to raise awareness because I felt like it wasn't being talked about enough. As a child, I didn't see anybody speaking on sickle cell or any books on sickle cell. So I was just like, you know what, I'm going to be a voice for those who are silent because too many of us are silent and it's hurting us. We feel like we're suffering in silence. So I was just like, I'm going to speak up. And I was able to have the support in speaking up. And that's what led me to advocating in sickle cell spaces. And then I figured, it's more than just advocating in sickle cell spaces. We can make changes through legislation. And I got involved with that. And that's, like you said, that's how I met you. But I realize it's important to also have legislation in place so that we can have access to care and access to treatment. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and while we're there, I know that you have talked about like a lack of funding and support for rare diseases and sickle cell. Um, how has that lack of financial support in terms of research and all the stuff impacted the lives of those living with sickle cell? How does um, how does that lack of funding and support impact those navigating a sickle cell diagnosis? Like, what does that mean for the sickle cell community?
it's huge because without the funding, you're not able to research sickle cell. You're not even able to come up with the medications. The lack of funding can affect the family who needs medical equipment or have trouble getting their prescriptions or just that funding because they're not able to work or you're dealing with parents who can't work or even people living with sickle cell who are not able to work like everybody else, so they don't have the resources to provide for themselves. So that lack of funding is tremendous and it's huge. And it's one of the things that we speak when we speak about raising sickle cell awareness. We also have to throw in um, donating too, donating those funds so that we can have, like you said, we can have hospitals that we can go to. We can have the medical equipment. We can have the researchers to help come up with the cures that we need. Because without that, we're going to continue to be in and out of the hospital system and not get the right care that we need without that funding. So it's big.
Yeah, yeah. Genesis, let me ask you in terms of like funding and research, you're in two spaces, the sickle cell space, the cancer space, well, three even, the bone marrow space. Have you noticed a difference in the level of funding that one space receives over the other? We know that there's a huge margin of funding when it comes to cancer research and all the stuff. What are you seeing being in multiple spaces in terms of your healthcare journey?
Yeah. Um, I do know that there is definitely more that we need for we there is a lack of funding definitely within the sickle cell space compared to cancer funding, and that's why I try to advocate within the sickle cell space as well as within the rare disease space, because I think it's such a huge need for for the access of care that I received within the National Institute of Health, just for the type of treatment that I received for my curative therapy, um, that overall cure is such a huge funded or research project that they do at the National Institute of Health. Um, I told my grandma on the day that I received my cells from my mom that I wish that I could have backed up this experience for every sickle cell warrior, because it is such a intensive process that they put me through. But that whole funding that they did for me, the medications, the research, the head to toe workup, that is something that they have to fund for every warrior, and that is something that we have to continue to fund for sickle cell warriors, and that is something that I think is underfunded, and I think it is very needed. So yeah, I agree that it is there's definitely a difference there, and there's something that we definitely need to work on for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed too. I keep saying sickle cell patient, and you say sickle cell warrior. Why is that?
I say warrior because the battle that we go through from a day-to-day basis is not I don't like the word patient because it is a everyday battle that we experience from the emotional, physical, and overall toll that our body experiences. So I just overall take on the warrior
Yeah.
context instead of as opposed to the patient
No, I
context.
love it. I kept noticing. I noticed myself saying, as a patient and sickle cell patient, and it was just resonating that you kept saying warrior. So I wanted to highlight the fact that you consider y'all warriors, and by right, I gotta say, I love your explanation for that.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. All right, so let's see. We're gonna transition and let's talk a little bit about um just that patient empowerment. I think this was a good segue. I did not do this on purpose, but that was just a really good segue. Just talking about like that patient experience. Genesis, you talk about strength and battle. Those are words that you use. What advice would you give a person who is just getting started on their rare disease journey? It may not be sickle cell. It may not be, my son's diagnosis trisomy 18. They're just new in this space. What advice would you give them?
Uh, I would say to find your community, um, and to take every step and every moment as it comes.
Mhm.
Coming on 5 years post transplant in September, I would have thought I would be further along in context to how my body would be, in context to overall mental state, from healing from my transplant. But, I'm still healing from just an unexpected hospital visit, an unexpected delay. And I would say that you have to take everything with stride when you have a rare disease, and it is important to really not get hooked on the where you've envisioned yourself and where you actually are, and make sure that you really just focus on the everyday and where you are trying to go, and just take it day by day.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. What about you, James? What would you tell somebody?
I would say, you know, on your story and share your story and continue to put yourself in places where you do have an opportunity to share your story. Starting out, Genesis made an important point about finding your community. You find a supportive group that who allow you to speak up and say what's on your mind, what's on your heart, and how you feel about what you're going through, and not have any judgments, because that's
Yeah.
the one thing that will make a person not want to open up when they feel like they're being judged about their journey. So I would say get in those spaces where you have that support to speak up. I started out, like I said, I started out going through the hospitals and speaking up just in support groups. And then just continue to go on from there. I decided to get involved with nonprofit organizations and things with sickle cell, so that everybody was going through what I was going through. So we were able to speak up and share our journey. And just by continuing to speak up, you'll find strength in your story, and you'll be able to speak up and put yourself in different places to help people, because ultimately your voice, by you speaking up, you're advocating for the lives of others and improving the healthcare of others. So just know that you may feel like you're not making a difference, or you may feel like you're not being heard, but just sharing your story is reaching people. And even if it's just for yourself, it is therapeutic. I found along the way that sharing my story helped me just overall deal with how I felt about what I was going through, my struggles, my battles, my journeys, and then coming to see that when I did speak out, it was other people going through that, so I wasn't alone. And so that's what a voice does. It makes you feel like you're not alone and you're being heard. So that's what I would say. Share your story and continue to find your support group, find those communities and places where you can share your story and open up and speak out.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you highlight, the support groups and stuff that you found. Was that an easy task for you? I know a lot of people who talk about, the struggles or the challenges in finding support groups. And I know when I got my son's diagnosis, um, I I was told to find a support group and literally with no support or direction on how to even get started. So when I went looking for a support group, it was literally a Google search that I did. How did you find the support groups that you were able to be a part of?
Just online. It
Just
actually
online.
start yeah, online is a good start. But I've went through the hospital system. Like I said, I was in had a support group when I was a teenager, and so the one of the nurse had from the sickle cell clinic, she would put on these support groups where we could meet and we could talk to each other about it. And so it started in the hospital. And then as I got older, I went to a different hospital, and
Yeah,
come to find out they were trying to have a sickle cell clinic for sickle cell patients, because they recognized what was going on. And so they wanted to hear stories from us. And every Friday, it was something like that. One day out of the week,
yeah.
and let me say that again,
No, go ahead.
1 week out of a month, they would have support groups. And so anybody with sickle cell in their families could come in and share their story. And so that information was being used to go to the higher ups and say, this is why we need this is why we need the sickle cell support clinic, because these patients or people who live with sickle cell need it. And so it was important for me to share my story in that space. And
Yeah,
just being connected there, I was informed about different sickle cell organizations, and that led me to then get involved. And then from where I was living at the time, I was able to. I couldn't go to all of the things, but I knew online, by looking online, would see different organizations or different support groups, and I would just join them and speak up and share my voice, because that's the one thing. I couldn't get to half of these places, but just knowing that they had online support groups, and it's a lot easier than it was back in my day, where I felt like I didn't know anybody. We didn't have the internet like we did. And so
mhm,
it's
mhm.
definitely a thing to just look and just be connected to different organizations, and just do your
Yeah,
research and get online, because there is a lot of help out there. You just have to look for it.
yeah, yeah. Which is a whole nother soapbox.
Yeah.
The
You just
burden of responsibility that
yes.
comes with looking for the resources that you need. I thought it was just really interesting that you kept saying the support group at the hospital, because that was not my experience. There was no support group at the hospital. And I think it's really great that you were able to get plugged in at your local hospital, because I know that that's just not the reality for a lot of diagnoses.
Hmm.
It may not even be, the reality for another sickle cell patient at a different hospital, a different state, or whatever the case may be. All right, so we are at the close. This has been such a great conversation, but I do not want to close without you guys talking about your books real quick. So, for any of our listeners who may be interested in learning more about your story, or if they themselves are a sickle cell warrior, or if they are the parent or caregiver to a sickle cell warrior, and they want to use your book to help navigate those conversations. Let me start with you, Genesis. Tell everybody about your book, and if you got a copy of it nearby, hold it up and let people see so they'll know what they're searching for. Um,
So, all right. So the first one is Rebirth. This is Rebirth, the Sickle Cell Warriors crossover, and this is about the sickle cell warriors' pain and the transplant experience. And then this is Resilient, and this is about a sickle cell warrior's mental health battle and the relationships that can be intertwined with those.
oh wow, good
And
stuff.
these
And
are
both
poetry books.
poetry books. Oh, cool, cool.
Yes.
And both of those, and both are on Amazon, correct?
Yes, these are both on Amazon.
Perfect. James, what about you? I know you're an author too. Share your
Yes,
book.
so this is my book right here. You can see it. Breaking Silence Living with Sickle Cell Anemia, like you said. Um, the book is about my journey. I go through what I experienced after finding out I had sickle cell, being in and out of the hospital. I go talk about how it affected relationships because that's something that we don't think about. People who live with chronic illnesses or go through um, have a rare disease may not have this social their social life that they want because they are constantly dealing with being in and out of the hospital, so they don't have the social life and can't do some of the things that their peers could do. So I talk about that. I also talk about, you know, work as an adult, how it affected me with work. Jobs don't understand, and you have responsibilities, and so um, the pain involves every area of your life when you live with this rare disease and this condition, sickle cell. So you just have to make sure that you understand that. I just want people to understand that it does affect every area of your life, and so I go deep into like what it was like for me and how I had to deal with having sickle cell in the support group and just dealing with the pain and what the pain is like for me. And
Yeah.
so, one of the biggest rewards that I got after writing the book was having a parent email me and say thank you for writing your book because your story helped me understand my child, and that's what I wanted, and that let me know that I was doing something right because uh, parents don't understand what kids go through, and they may think if their child is in the hospital and they've been there and got released that they should be fine, but having this sickle cell is so unpredictable. You can be fine one day and then sick the next. So just that unpredictability and just knowing that that child is telling the truth when they're in pain. Because sometimes we get released still in pain, but the hopes is that once you get home, that everything will go be better and you're able to drink on your own and. So that's what I wanted to share, and that's what by talking about my story helped one person. So that was good. I was happy
Yeah.
about that.
Good stuff. And your book is on Amazon as well, correct?
Yes, yes, it is.
Perfect. I wanted to just thank y'all so much for being a part of this conversation and being vulnerable and sharing your stories and and not holding back about the continued work that needs to take place in order to move sickle cell forward and just the broader rare disease community forward. So I really, really appreciate you both for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah,
Thank
thank you
y'all.
for having me. Like I said, like you said, we met at was it Rare Disease Week or
I think so.
yeah,
Yeah.
legislation, and so like the people you
Yeah.
meet within the community may not be on the same journey as you, but we're all going through the same thing. So it's definitely a
Absolutely.
connection within the community. That's why I always say it's important to find a community that you connect with because along the way we that you'll get the help that you want because we're there to help each other, and it's just
Absolutely.
been great being around and meeting so many advocates in the space. And you too,
Yeah. Yeah.
Genesis. We've been on the call before, so I was
Yeah.
excited when I seen your name come across like somebody I know. So
Yeah. And I think it's so important too, in terms of just building that community, it doesn't have to be somebody with your same condition. Like
exact.
I truly have built community with other parents and caregivers who their children have a completely different diagnosis. But then I've also built community with people like you who are the actual warrior. And I'm the caregiver to a warrior. You see what I'm saying? So it's
Yes.
there's still just that opportunity to build that community of support. And I think it is important to know that the journeys are relatable, even if the
Mm,
diagnoses are not the same. So
definitely. Great
thank
point.
y'all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So, all right, guys, we are done with this episode. If you are not yet following the Being Well podcast, you should be. What are you waiting on? Go ahead and hit like and subscribe. You can watch our video versions of the podcast on our YouTube channel. You can listen to the Being Well podcast wherever you stream your traditional audio podcasts. Any last words, you two?
I would say keep going,
Yeah.
keep going and keep fighting because we all go through things and pain is just temporary. It's just a temporary part of of life. So the pain is temporary and you can overcome that and just keep going, keep fighting, share your story.
Yeah. Genesis, any last words?
I would say continue to push on and keep fighting because you'll never know where God is continuing to lead you.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, guys. Well, thank y'all so much again for being here. Until the next one, be rare. Holla. Peace.